Hey, what's up, my people? John Middlekauff, new YouTube channel. What I need you to do, subscribe, like the video, leave a comment, share with your friends. Appreciate everyone that has. It's the podcast, 3 and Out. You can listen wherever you listen to podcasts. Apple, Spotify. We got you covered. Also, thevolume.com, thevolume.com. We got merch right here. Flex Fit hat. Go to thevolume.com. Get yourself a 3 and Out hat. Okay, wanted to react to the breaking news of Wednesday. Yesterday, we learned Ben Johnson not leaving. So he wasn't going to go to Washington, which we all thought. Seattle, I think most of us assumed, which you got to be careful about assuming, it makes an ass out of you and me, that Dan Quinn was going to go to the Seahawks. And I'm sure like many were like, God, that feels like a poor man's version of Pete, who, if he didn't have the right offensive coordinator, he was not a very good head coach. We just saw his defense be an utter disaster in front of 40 million people in the first round at home. I don't know, John. Like, this is going to be your one shot. And let's face it, if Ben Johnson's not going to leave, because I do tend to agree, if all things are equal, I'll go with the offensive guy. There weren't offensive options. If Ben Johnson's not available, like, who am I hiring? So all the best coaching candidates, starting with Belichick and Vrabel, were defensive guys. And I would have hired Mike Vrabel. Now, I'm not naive or ignorant enough. There's more that just goes into plugging this guy into third base and putting him at third in the lineup. That's not how it works. So if I'm John Schneider, how much juice does he want? I'm in control, 1. And 2, does he get along with people? If he's not going to get along with me, I've had a pretty good relationship with my head coach. Maybe it never would have worked. You get a guy, Mike Macdonald, who, the last 2 years has probably been the best defensive coordinator in football. He's definitely one of the best defensive minds in football. I know a couple coaches with the Ravens. His nickname's like Boy Genius. Now, being an assistant coach and being a coordinator is so much different than being the head coach, factoring administrative work, being a huge part of the draft and free agency. You work hand in hand with the GM. You build the staff. You, as the defensive guy, now have to worry about the offense, not just from a personnel standpoint, but philosophically, the coaching staff. So there's no guarantee. I don't care how great a coordinator you are. And Ben Johnson and Mike Macdonald, the last 2 years, have been 2 of the better coordinators in recent memory. Like, it doesn't get any better. It's why they are such highly valued head coaching prospects. It's a completely different ballgame. I mean, it's the same industry, but your role is dramatically different. Now, I say this all the time. When I hire a young guy, I would say under 50, but if you want to go like mid to late 40s, you got to call your side of the ball. Like, I'm hiring Mike Macdonald for his defensive mind. So I want him to be the head coach and my defensive coordinator, right? When Matt LaFleur, Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay, when those guys get hired, they are the head coach and they are my offensive coordinator. I am never into this young guy. I'm hiring 42-year-old Robert Saleh to make you the CEO. Like, I hate that. Despise that. Mike Macdonald got this job. Obviously, there's character and people like him and all that stuff because he's an elite schematic defensive mind. Proven it. Michigan, 2 years at the Ravens. Like, I want that expertise on full display as my defensive coordinator. And as long as he's doing that, totally understand it. Because if you're John Schneider and you go, well, I don't see on this open market a Kyle Shanahan or Sean McVay. And I got to play those guys 4 times a year. So I will get, in my mind, the best defensive coordinator to hopefully slow those guys down. Right? I mean, technically, he beat both those 2 teams. I mean, he had 5 interceptions, his unit did, against Kyle. And they had a knockdown slugfest against the Rams in overtime that they wanted a walk-off punt return. But this guy, from everything I know, and I know people that have been around him, well-liked, very impressive. And now you just got to see, because anytime you're under the gun, it's you managing the clock. It's you calling the timeouts. It's you dealing with the quarterback. Like, listen, there's a big difference between being friendly, with your offensive guys, talking some shit with Lamar, having fun at practice, and like, that's your quarterback, right? You're the head coach. He's looking at you. And that's a huge question in Seattle. Who's going to be their quarterback? I mean, they got Geno for the short term, but do they move up in the draft and pick one? And as we know, John Schneider's in control. So John Schneider has proven to have a pretty good eye when it comes to quarterbacks. Russell Wilson, he wanted to trade Russell Wilson and go get Josh Allen. Hell, he even liked Geno Smith. And look at Geno Smith. He liked Drew Lock a lot. Clearly, that's why he was part of the trade with Russell Wilson. Drew Lock won them a game this year on that last 2-minute drive against the Eagles. So I trust John Schneider as a player acquisition, that being his go-to ability as a general manager. Like, he's great at it in the draft. Obviously, they've made some poor moves over the years, but Pete Carroll was the guy in charge. And that dynamic now, you never know until you start working with each other. Do you guys philosophically view football the same way? Now, John has spent 15 years with Pete Carroll, who's a defensive-minded, tough guy. So I would imagine Pete, philosophically, the way he views football, obviously John been molded through that, and now working with Mike, who comes from the Ravens and the Harbaugh brothers, they're going to have a lot in common philosophically when it comes to the sport, because we never talk about that. If you're not on the same page, the GM and the head coach, in what you are looking for in players, it'll never work. It's impossible, because, the GM will get the coach players he doesn't want. The coach will want players the GM doesn't want, and there'll just be constant backstabbing. And let's face it, more than likely, this will be John Schneider's shot. You usually don't, if this doesn't work out and they have to fire Mike Macdonald in 3 or 4 years, history would say GMs don't usually get multiple coaches after already being there with Pete. So this probably has to go pretty well, and this is challenging. The Rams are on the come up. They have a young, excellent team and a superstar head coach. The 49ers have been to 4 NFC championship games in 5 years, and they're favored in the Super Bowl. So this is a very, very difficult division. Even Arizona with Kyler Murray, are a feisty little bunch. So I think this is a challenging job. But listen, this is what most coaches would tell you. And I've talked to some of these guys when they take these jobs, like, why are you doing this? You got to strike when the iron's hot. He got a 6-year contract, which I would guess is potentially over $10 million a year. Like, that's, even if he's making $3 million with the Ravens, there's a big difference between a 3-year, $9 million contract and a 6-year, $60 million contract. So financially, it changed your life. You are already really rich. Now you never even think about money really the rest of your life, if you just have a guy that can walk straight and chew gum at the same time managing your finances. And you get, a place, Russell Wilson turned that into a great football town. It's got an incredible home field advantage. Like I said, you got a really good gentleman, and you got good pieces on the team. You got some really good young offensive talent. The defense needs a lot of work, but that's, Mike's expertise. So I think this is a good hire. Kind of a weird way we got here, but we got here. And now I think all signs point or questions point to, what are the Commanders going to do? Aaron Glenn, Weaver with Baltimore. I don't know. I don't have a good feel for it. And I know Adam Peters. I always thought they were going to get Ben Johnson. I thought that was a borderline lock. And like most things in sports, it's a lock until it's not a lock. And then the guy returns to Detroit. And then Mike Macdonald, who then I thought they would hire. When Ben Johnson returned, if you would ask me yesterday, who's Washington end up hiring? I'm like, oh, let's hire Mike Macdonald. It's right in their backyard. Well, now he's going to Seattle. Listen, if you look at the coach's history, the owner's history, Josh Harris, look at his last 2 hires in Philadelphia. He hired Doc Rivers, a really famous NBA champion, and then he hired Nick Nurse, one of the highest paid coaches in the NBA, also NBA champion. So I do wonder, would Mike Vrabel still be in play? Would Belichick still be in play? It doesn't seem likely, but are you more likely to hire Aaron Glenn than Mike Vrabel? Like I said, there are dynamics as the GM. Can you work with the guy? I've never been a part of these GM head coaching interviews. If you don't know the coach, how could you feel great? I don't care how much recon, how many calls of reference you do, of just sitting and talking with the guy for 4 or 5 hours. I could convince most people in a couple hours, if we were talking about the right subject, that I was a pretty impressive guy. That does not mean at all we'd get along once we were no longer interviewing. That process has always seemed a little fucked up to me. What, you met with this guy twice for 5 hours and just called around a bunch? Think how much time, if you draft a guy in the first round, how much time teams spend with those prospects. They go to the Senior Bowl. They watch him play at the Senior Bowl. They interview him at the Senior Bowl. They go to his pro day. Some of them take him out to dinner at his pro day, the night before, the night after. You see him at the combine. You meet with him at the combine. Your scouts go out of the way at the combine and spend time with him. You constantly have had scouts going through the school throughout the year. Maybe he talked to him. You get so much recon on the player. Yet with a coach, it's like, yeah, we've heard all this stuff. We feel pretty good. We met with him for 4 hours on Zoom and, went to Morton Steakhouse. We like the guy. We're going to make him our head coach. 6-year deal, $75 million. It's one thing if it's like Andy Reid or Sean Payton, but some of these coordinators, like, yeah, Jim Harbaugh and John Harbaugh like the guy. And I'm not trying to talk shit at all. I just think about that process. Right? Think how long you date someone before you marry them. Like, yeah, we dated 3.5 years. Dated 4 years. First couple years, then we moved in together. Like, it's usually like, yeah, we met and then, a couple dates and shit, married, and 2 months later we had a kid. Usually some time. Like, it's kind of a serious thing. So I think, I don't know, this process is kind of weird to me. It always has been. Beside, like, if you get Belichick, you know what you're getting, right? If Sean Payton, like, you kind of have an idea what you're getting. But some of these coordinators that have been with basically one head coach the whole time feel like a pretty big risk. Because, of course, that coach is going to love the guy, especially if they've been having success. But then we just interview him really fast? I don't know. Another big shocker today. Shocker would be strong, but I told everybody, get ready. Brandon Staley, Green Bay Packers defensive coordinator. And then, like, last week, he interviewed. They hired Jeff Hafley, the Boston College coach. When I used to go to 49er practices when I worked in radio and lived in the Bay, Chip Kelly brought in this young DB coach named Jeff Hafley. So I just kind of, I'd see him at practice, and immediately when you go to a practice and there's a new coaching staff, you spend some time Googling guys and kind of getting to know them. Not personally, but just kind of figure out where they're from. And then when Chip Kelly was fired after a year, Kyle Shanahan came in and kept Hafley on the staff. So when that happened, I immediately went, God, this guy must be kind of impressive. And then knowing people in the front office with the 49ers, people really, really liked him. And then from the 49ers, he became the Ohio State defensive coordinator, which, be the DB coach for the 49ers at the time. The first couple of years, the Niners weren't good. He left to be the DB coach or the co-defensive coordinator, I think, for Ohio State. That's an enormous job. And within a year, he's a head coach in Boston College. Now, at Boston College, it was not going very well. I know they made a bowl game this year, but I'm pretty sure he was on the hot seat coming into the season. And I've seen a lot of people on Twitter saying this is what happens because of NIL. This is what happens when there's a bunch of uncertainty with players in college football. No, I think this is what happens when you're probably going to get fired. And Boston College is a pretty crappy job. Like in 2024, Boston College, I'm sorry, is a god-awful Power 5 football job. You're not going to win there. You have no chance to win there. And if you end up going 6-6 or 7-5, that's a good season. You'll eventually get fired. So going to Green Bay and being the defensive coordinator, well, if you're a good defensive coordinator and now you have head coaching experience and you've worked for Kyle Shanahan, you've worked at Ohio State, you've worked for Matt LaFleur, in 2 years, if that defense is like top 10 and the Green Bay Packers are, competing with the Niners and Rams and the Lions in the playoffs, Eagles and Cowboys, like, what about us? You guys too. And you're just a major factor. Like, he's going to be interviewing for NFL head coaching jobs. So it's shitty. Like, it would suck if you were a player on Boston College. But like I say now, I don't feel any pity anymore for I don't have the energy for the disingenuous takes of like, what about the players? Well, everyone's getting paid now, and you can leave whenever you want. So a coach leaves, you can leave, you can stay, do whatever the fuck you want. The no pity parties anymore. We don't need to pretend like the coaches get all the money. No, the players are getting paid now too. And you're at Boston College. So it's not like it's USC or Alabama. So I ain't watching your games. But listen, it's just part of the business. Sometimes you got to watch out for you. Sometimes you got to be selfish. I'm sure he pissed off a lot of people when this news broke. But if I'm Jeff Hafley, this is a no-brainer. I mean, he probably didn't need to think about it very long. And I think now, if you are a Packer fan, you got to be kind of excited, right? A lot of pressure to get rid of his buddy Joe Barry. He did it. Now, whether he wanted to or not, who cares? He's gone. Then I was like, you're going to hire Brandon Staley? You're really going to hire Brandon Staley? And then you get Jeff Hafley. So half of your excitement is just going to be, even if you don't know much about this guy, it's just not Brandon Staley. And there's going to be a lot of pressure on this guy. I mean, this job, a lot like being the Ohio State defensive coordinator, a lot of people are keeping tabs on you. I would imagine the buzz for the Green Bay Packers going into 2024 is going to be really high. A lot of people are going to pick them to make the playoffs. I bet some people, depending on what they do this offseason on defense, there'll be a sleeper like NFC Championship, Super Bowl appearance type team. So it's not like you're just taking over some random Carolina Panthers, right? And you just took the money and you bounced college. Like you're taking a job that is under the microscope. So he ain't afraid of the bright lights because that division's hard. Obviously, the Lions are going to be really good. The Lions are going to be better next year than they were this year. Why? Because they're going to add on defense. If I were them, I would buy a corner and I would draft a corner. Your offense is going to be fucking awesome. And your run defense is already awesome. So if you can just get better at pass defense, I mean, you're looking at a team that can compete to be the number 1 seed next year. And the Bears, like if their defense just continues to play at a high level and you add Caleb Williams, like they're going to be a factor. They're just a tough team to play. Minnesota, who knows? I mean, they're a great wild card, but I don't have the NFC North schedule in front of me, what divisions they play. But I if you had to just not knowing draft, free agency and stuff, I'd say the Packers 10 to 12 win team. And, I mean, you can win 11 games and be a really good team. Like the Bills won 11 games this year, and they were pretty damn good going into the playoffs. Obviously, they had a bunch of injuries, but like I think sometimes like 11 wins, like shit, we're 13 or 14, like 11's. You go 11-6, you had a pretty good season. Now you might need to win more than that to win the division, but listen, you get the 6th or 5th wild card. We saw this year the Packers gave the Niners all they could handle. So fascinating hire.